Well, get ready to see this video in different forums across YouTube all day. It's been reported by the Hollywood Reporter that Kathleen Kennedy is expected to retire from her role as president of Lucasfilm by the end of this year, 2025. She's held the role of president since 2012. She was initially co-chair alongside George Lucas, then after the purchase of Lucasfilm by Disney, she moved exclusively into the role as president. To say that Kathleen Kennedy is a somewhat maligned figure among the Star Wars community might be putting it lightly. I will say, however, it's never been my approach. Kathleen Kennedy is the president of Lucasfilm, but Lucasfilm is no longer an independent entity, so I find it difficult to assign all of the blame for Star Wars' various missteps to her directly. I think the biggest mistake that Star Wars made quite clearly was the mishandling of the sequel trilogy, specifically the lack of an overarching plot and the kind of rush to get everything out by 2019. That, however, seemed to be largely because of the efforts of Bob Iger, but if you are Kathleen Kennedy, you know, the buck has to stop with you as well, and I think it's fair to say that there have been other major missteps as well. Like I said, I typically don't find it helpful to put the blame on any one person in particular, especially when it comes to sort of nebulous mistakes, but Star Wars, you know, I don't want to say it's a crisis right now, but things are not nearly as good as they should be, but I feel like that's also the case for Marvel, which is in the middle of another really big flop with the new Captain America movie. For example, I think probably from the top down, there was a directive that each of the big Disney heavy hitters needs to be producing content for streaming, and that's really backfired for both Star Wars and Marvel, which have arguably diluted the value of their brand by putting out mediocre products. But while I'd call that a strategic mistake, Star Wars has also made smaller tactical mistakes even within specific series. For example, I think one of the most harmful things done to Star Wars as a streaming property was the sort of reversal of The Mandalorian Season 2 in the Book of Boba Fett. The Book of Boba Fett should have been its own show, and I think was actually shaping up to be something pretty cool. Then they brought Mando in. They completely derailed not just that show, but also The Mandalorian as a series. Season 3 suffered because of that, and I think generally we're still feeling the effects of that mistake. Again, was that because of Kathleen Kennedy? I don't know. It's very possible that Disney saw the value of The Mandalorian as a character and Grogu as a character. They might have seen 2 years between Mandalorian properties and tried to, retool the Book of Boba Fett to get more Mando to keep it in the public consciousness, but it was a mistake either way. And at some point, I think criticism has to fall on the president. And Star Wars and Lucasfilm as a company is certainly in a transitional point. I'd say this is the third major one since the Disney buyout. The first was in 2012 when they started full work on the sequels. I think they did some things well. The Force Awakens was arguably the best possible blockbuster they could have gotten given its immense success and how it drove popularity to the franchise. Although, you know, of course, what I think about the lack of an overall plan. The second major inflection point came in 2019 as The Rise of Skywalker was about to release. They decided to move more heavily into streaming. I think their decision there was affected by releases like Rogue One and probably also the mess of The Rise of Skywalker. And again, I think early decisions were made well. The Mandalorian was obviously a massive hit, and I shudder to think where Star Wars would be right now in terms of popular consciousness without it. But again, whether this was because of Disney or Kathleen Kennedy, we saw too much and we saw bad products weighing down the overall effort. And I think the biggest failure of this era has to be the Kenobi show. It did not have enough budget. It did not have the right director. It was the series which had easily the most hype. I saw it on my YouTube numbers. I saw how many people gave it a chance. It was their opportunity to create something truly great, to get people reinvigorated, and it was a massive, massive failure. It was an ugly show. It was ultimately a boring show. Very little of it worked. And that to me is the failure of this era, at least on the streaming side, because the other thing that whether it's Kathleen Kennedy or whether it's Disney, her name is associated with it is the lack of film production since 2019. How many times have we heard this story? Patty Jenkins announces Rogue Squadron movie. Rian Johnson announces unnamed Star Wars trilogy. Sean Levy, whoever else, again and again. They talk the talk, but they can't get these productions actually cooking. And that's something else that's been a problem since at least 2014. Rogue One, Solo, The Rise of Skywalker especially, all had major personnel issues leading to perhaps worst end products, but certainly confusion. So going towards this next crossroads, they need to decide what Star Wars is going to look like as a media property. Is it going to be a film series with the occasional TV and streaming show? Is it going to be a streaming property with the occasional film? Is it going to be neither? I don't know. There are certainly areas for improvement across the board. I'm very concerned that the next film is The Mandalorian and Grogu. That does not get me very excited, and I worry it's not going to get general fans very excited, but Andor Season 2 looks great. Some of the upcoming novels look great. I need to see more on the video game front, but I'm also not being hired to replace Kathleen Kennedy, which takes me to the obvious question. Who will be the next president of Lucasfilm? You're going to see it on YouTube. You're going to see it on Twitter. But no, George Lucas will not be helming Lucasfilm. The dude is 80 years old. He's a billionaire, and overall, he seems to be done with Star Wars fans and with making things for public consumption. And God knows you can't blame the guy. But that's a fantasy. It's not going to happen. George has always been more than Star Wars. He's a creative at heart, and he's worth $5.2 billion. To be honest, I don't think if he was worth $5.2 thousand, he'd think about it. Anyway, the big, I think, speculation is going to be either Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau. Of the two, I would prefer by far Jon Favreau, but I'm guessing one of them is also partially responsible for the mishandling of The Mandalorian. Of the two, I would pick in a heartbeat Jon Favreau. I just don't think Dave Filoni works as well from like a planning point. But maybe it's someone else, who knows. Either way, very interesting times. Of course, I've only talked in this video about Lucasfilm as it relates to Star Wars. Obviously, another big recent stain on the company is The Dial of Destiny, one of the biggest box office flops of all time, which is unfortunate because I actually thought it was a decent movie. I did a review on my channel when it came out, but I mean, these are hard times for Disney. After the 2010s were arguably their decade of domination between Marvel and the MCU becoming an absolute juggernaut, successes like The Force Awakens and The Mandalorian. Now, here we are, less than a decade later, and things are looking tough. But I'll just end with this. Kathleen Kennedy probably isn't being pushed out. Her contract has been renewed time and time again by Disney. Kathleen Kennedy's retiring because she's 71 years old. So it's hard to say that what has happened is a repudiation of the last 10 years, or even that it signals a major change in direction for the brand. I guess if you hope that Star Wars will be better under someone else's leadership and that the president of Lucasfilm has a lot of power, maybe you're celebrating this. For me, we'll see. I don't know to what degree Kathleen Kennedy is responsible for the mistakes of the brand. There was also a lot that I liked. I thought The Force Awakens was good. I liked a lot of the shows, like The Mandalorian, even some of the less popular ones like Ahsoka I really liked. But I guess we'll see. Anyway, let me know all your thoughts and more down below. This is probably going to be a spicy one. Keep the comments respectable. See you guys next time.